Let's turn now to Bill. Bill, you are up, and I assume that we can get Bill's presentation up.
Hey, good day, good afternoon for most of you, and some still in the morning. Happy and to be here. Also privileged. Thanks for the invite. Charlotte, thanks for that intro earlier. So I'm really here representing sort of a dual role, if you will. One is the IEEE Task Force on Resilience, and this is a group that we formed under the PES governing board recently, primarily stemming from a lot of interest in this topic of resilience. And so we formed this group to, with a collection of the industry subject matter expertise, trying to think about what's sort of the latest state of our thinking in terms of resilience. So I have some prepared slides. I certainly don't plan on covering all the details because I think both Joe and Bobby cover some of the key principles really well, and maybe I'll just take a few minutes to hit on some of the highlights and also sort of reflect a bit since I've been involved in this space and in a more sort of the practical application of this, so some of my personal key takeaways and some opportunities that we have in the future. So again, there's a number of slides ready. It's available for your reference. I don't plan on going through all of it. Maybe we'll just go through, if we could pivot to slide 4, if we cover that. Okay. Yeah, so this will just sort of build on what Joe and Bobby have described earlier. And one thing I do want to point out is the differences between reliability and resilience, if you will. Really, it's a continuum. Over the year, I've actually have sort of internalized this myself. Reliability at its core, it's sort of the end state. You're talking about a level of inconvenience for the consumers, the customers. But resilience is really a whole different scale. It's the consequences of not having a resilient system. Really, we're talking about a mass scale pain and suffering and casualty, if you will. And this diagram here at the lower right-hand corner of the slide sort of gives you a perspective in terms of the scale and scope of the events and the duration of the outages, if you will. It's as you progress from a sort of localized event to a larger scale, longer duration, the impact, the social economic impact is an exponential increase. It's definitely not a linear relationship. And I think our both Joe and Bobby talked about that a bit. If we could advance to the next slide, I wanted to make key differentiator here. Resiliency in this context really encompasses a lot more than just sort of an end state performance, and really encompasses the whole process of what we call response and recovery, if you will. And so the whole idea of resilience, using this diagram, we call it the resilience trapezoid, is that we can anticipate the event. Obviously, if we could prevent any sort of a degradation in the system performance, that's ideal. We wanted to have advanced preparation to do that. But it's the recognition that the sky is the limit here, and there is no amount of resources that's available to be able to prevent any kind of these sort of trauma from impacting the system. We should build in the expectations that there will be a degradation of the system performance. The whole idea of the resilience is when confronted with these type of external trauma, we wanted to decrease the depth of system performance as you've seen on this chart. So make that dip as shallow as possible. And the other thing is sort of the transition, the post-disturbance recovery process, make that as short as possible. And in fact, build in the capability as we recover, we don't just get back to the original state. And that's what on the right-hand side of the chart here, the little gap, a red arrow gap, showing that ideally what we wanted to do is in the process of recovery and rebuild, we get better so that the next time around that we're able to withstand greater impact. So I think that's a really important concept, at least in the preparation and leading up to the publication of this paper. We thought this is a really important concept to think about as we prepare, for greater resiliency for the industry. And that is really the differentiator where thinking about resiliency, needs to be a much broader stakeholder engagement, because if you think about sort of the response and recovery process, involves a lot more than just the utility grid operator. It involves local emergency planning personnel, the responses, and could potentially involve stakeholders across the entire spectrum, from the federal to state to local, county, and city level. So it's really important to engage the stakeholder in the process of discussing what is the value of resiliency, how do we improve in each one of these areas, and what are the correct investment thesis that needs to be focused on for us to get better. So that's one of the key takeaway. If we could, I know we're limited on time, so let me maybe just advance towards the very last slide. There's a few sort of the summary points I think it's worthwhile just pointing out as we dialogue about this. So if we could advance to the slide 12, last slide. Yeah, thank you. Keep going. I know there's a bit of a delay there. Yeah. Excellent, thank you. So here's really sort of the conclusion, key takeaway from the paper. Hopefully you all have a chance to download. If not, I think Carrie may have provided a link for you to download this paper. In fact, I think there's a special period where we are making this paper available free of charge for folks even outside of the IEEE membership group. So first and foremost, is the electric grid resilience is really the foundational building block for everything that we do, and so much more important, particularly as we continue to advance sort of the clean energy future, where we're going to see a lot more renewable resources, energy storage, and electrification all going to be part of the overall strategy for this pathway. There's are strong mutual dependencies of the electric sector with several other critical infrastructure sectors, namely, the fuel supply, oil, natural gas, the telecommunication network, the transportation and water supply that we and most recently learned about as well, obviously with the events in Texas. I talked a little bit about sort of the second point on the interplay between reliability and resilience, where resilience deals more with the capability to respond and recover rather than just an end state performance measure, if you will. And which is why, sort of leading to the next bullet point about one size fits all resilience metric is just simply not practical. If you think about the idea, the fundamental sort of the benefit of having a metric is obviously we wanted to know if we're getting any better. We want to know what the end state is. The other key benefit is be able to compare and contrast and to be able to share learning and best practices so we continuously get better. So with that in mind, the metrics needs to be something that's easily applied, if you will, in an operational world, and lend itself to the ability to be compare sort of on an apple-to-apple basis between regions, between utility operators, between key stakeholders, so there is a greater understanding. The other sort of key takeaway is this collaboration between policymakers, the regulatory oversights, grid operators, and local communities are critically important to determine first the value of the resilience and then the proper investment thesis. Because again, the idea here is we could be chasing an event that's very, very rare, but there may be other more important type of system events that we need to be prepared for. And what is the value of being prepared for a particular type of event really depends on sort of the collective wisdom of all the stakeholder inputs across the board. And the other sort of the key takeaway is in the planning assumptions, particularly say, for example, in climate change issues, which that's been on the forefront recently, really important to have a level of transparency and the assumptions, a consistency in the assumption across different industry sectors, not just for the electric sectors, but the same type of key planning assumptions that could be applied towards the electric sector, to the telecommunication sector, to the fuel supply sector, to the transportation sectors, and so forth. So we're all planning on the same basis of dealing with the more extreme weather events, the extreme precipitation, if you will, the sea level rise or extreme temperature or drought condition, and its potential impact to each one of these sectors. So it's really important to have a sort of a consistency and level of transparency in this planning effort. Finally, last but not least, is as we think about resiliency, and we really are thinking about low probability event, and this lends itself quite nicely into sort of the risk planning framework, if you will. And this is why a risk-based probabilistic stochastic analysis is more appropriate than the traditional sort of scenario deterministic planning approach. But in any case, the planning would need to, at least for the electric sector, need to require integration across sort of all three domains: the generation, transmission, and the distribution domain. And so the idea here is to apply what we talked about in the paper, this framework of prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery, and then apply sort of risk-based analysis to help inform what are the right investments for us, because there is, obviously we all recognize there's limited financial and also manpower resources that are available for us to address these daunting challenge for us. So that's sort of some of my key takeaway. I also wanted to point out in the paper, there's a section that we have highlighted some of the common practices that the utility operator are taking to harden the system. That's a very important efforts for us. And there are some really good practical examples that could certainly better the system performance, regardless of the type of events that we're likely to be encountering. So that's a good reference as well. And I had some example in the previous slide 11, but I won't spend time to go into those, because I know we are limited on time, maybe more value to address some potential Q&A from the audience. So with that, I'll pause and turn it back to Charlotte and maybe Joe as well, as we discuss more about the Q&A. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bill.